we are expected to provide our health records when we get hired to the employer. Okay, so would you like your genetic information to be included in the report? That was the reason.
So the information wasn't very complete.
Right.
Okay, now, Rob, does somebody else have a hand up over here?
Oh.
Did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about the, there was an answer that came up rather common, where the category problematic, that it was okay, but there was problematic, and I immediately kind of honed in on that. What do they mean by problematic? And I'm wondering whether you went into that any more deeply, or whether you plan to look at those sort of, that seems to me to suggest that there's some anxieties there that may be worth exploring.
Yeah, but I have to admit that this is a telephone survey, so we have limitations in the number of questions we can ask, and the complexity of questions, and this time we did not pursue further to go into the details of what they think about, what they really have in their minds. Maybe next time we'll do it.
Thank you. Rob, I think last question.
Yeah, just a short comment about the 4%. As Eva already pointed out, it's kind of a slippery ground, because we cannot talk about informed consent without the full disclosure, and it must be stressed out that Leo was telling us about a couple of days ago, signing documents of 5 pages, but removing the keyboard. But this can be seen as also as informed consent.
That's right. Yeah.
It's useless. Yeah.
So I'm very much concerned with the efficacy of informed consent rather than just the paper,
Yeah.
right?
It's just,
And my position is that 5-page complicated informed consent document, it does not necessarily guarantee the better understanding on the part of the patient and the subjects. The research subjects. So I would rather go for the way to raise their awareness and level of understanding.
yeah. And the second one was, I agree with Margaret that maybe the question about the data banks on genetics for people with prisons, that means the forensic data, would be a little bit too broad, because it has to be distinguished for some. For example, for some misdemeanors or some sex crimes, and I think that would be also diverting the public opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. And the next paper is by Mitsuro. Sorry, thank you. I'll turn it on this time.
Next paper, Mitsuro Kunisaka from Japan. On the historical and ethical analysis of leprosy control policy. Okay? Thank you. I have it. I don't use five.
So there's already
Thank you, Gary. Ready for the You receive my handout. So let me start. Leprosy control policy in Japan is one of the landmark cases that should evoke ethical discussion in the history of Japanese medicine. However, it has seldom been discussed in bioethics society, even in this country. So I hope all of you to know the fact and learn something from its history. At the core of the century-long history of the policy had been isolation and sterilization of patients with leprosy. These policies were officially advocated by Japanese nephrologists, legislated by Japanese diet, and continued up to 1996. Please look at the brief chronology in my handout. The isolation of leprosy patients was justified by Leprosy Prevention Law (ATL) in 1907. People with leprosy were forced to be incarcerated in remote leprosaria. The number of those incarcerated in leprosaria reached 11,000 in 1955, which was estimated at 91% of all patients in the country. On the other hand, the sterilization of leprosy patients was also advocated and performed by Japanese leprologists since 1915. Please note that leprosy was believed to be inheritable until 19th century in many countries, but it was denied, at least when Dr. Armauer Hansen of Norway identified the bacillus in 1869. However, the vasectomy and abortion of leprosy patients were legalized by Japanese law in 1948. The abortion was enforced when female patients were found to be pregnant. Recently, some female patients reported that infanticide was also enforced in some cases. That was kept illegal throughout the case. The isolation and sterilization policy survived the end of World War II when the Constitution of Japan guaranteed fundamental human rights. 50s and 60s, when many industrialized countries abolished isolation policy, because it was then evident that the disease was very contagious, and also survived even 70s and 80s when bioethics was introduced into Japanese society, and the scholars started to discuss about patients' rights and informed consent. It was in 1996 when the isolation sterilization policy was repealed, and in 2001 when the isolation policy was judged to be an error by a district court. A leading leprologist who advocated the isolation sterilization policy strongly believed that they were doing what is of benefit to leprosy patients. A leading leprologist, Ken Yamita, wrote in 1950 as if he was acting as a guardian of his patients. That is shown on my handout. Another feature of the paternalism in Japanese leprosy was found in their conservative. Japanese leprologists kept their ears closed not only to the voice of patients, but to evidence-based argument in international medical societies. There were a few Japanese leprologists, such as Nobu Urasawa, who argued against the isolation sterilization policy. His argument was denounced
by the majority of Japanese nephrologists from political or authoritarian rather than medical standpoint. Dr. Ogasawara was called a traitor's information at 15th conference of the Japanese Association of Nephrology in 1941, the year when Japan went into World War II. However, the conservatism in Japanese nephrologists should not be ascribed to pre-war fascism of the nation, because the policies were not changed after World War II, with the exception of Okinawa, an island group southwest of Japan, which was then occupied by the United States. The patient right movement started very early. Patients' unions were organized to improve their living conditions of the Rosaria in the 1930s and 1940s. Their activity was suppressed during the wartime and terrorized by the confinement into Tsukuba. The Tsukuba symbolizes another striking feature of the paternalism in Japanese nephrology. It is rigorousness with disobedient patients. Empowered by nephrology prevention law revised in 1916 to arrest and punish patients without court order, the directors of the Rosarium could stint their food and put them in confinement rooms. Furthermore, directors could terrorize patients by warning them to be put in Tsukuba. Tsukuba was officially given a delusive name of special sick room, but actually was a maximum confinement facility consisting of 8 dark cells. Please look at the photographs and figure. There was no heating apparatus, despite the room temperature dropped in winter to around -20 centigrade or -4 Fahrenheit, when the cells were surrounded by deep snow in roofless depths separating each cell. Patients punished here was supplied only small quantity of meals twice a day and kept in prison much longer than the ordained period. The longest imprisonment known was over 500 days. Post-war investigation found that 22 of 92 people imprisoned died of cold, undernourishment, debility, and suicide. The case of Uchida Yamai, a patient, illustrates how the deadly punishment of Tsukuba hampered patients' right movement in those days. Yamai was a patient at Hamazen-Seiei, a national repository in the suburb of Tokyo, requested on behalf of patients to renew their rubber boots to work at the laundry. As Mitsuda mentioned in the quotations in the handout, patients in the area were encouraged to be engaged in various works to promote the welfare of the area. After his request was rejected, patients stopped to work in the laundry. Yamai was then arrested by staff of the area and sent to Tsukuba with the reason that he was responsible for the strike. He fell into a critical condition in 44 days of confinement and died in 45 days after discharge. There has been rare media coverage about the patient's movement, and Japanese media generally appreciated the isolation policies until around 1980s. For example, Asahi Shimbun, one of mass circulation national daily newspapers, admired Kensuke Mitsuda as Japanese Albert Schweitzer in 1964, mourning for his death. The century-long isolation and rare media coverage resulted in public ignorance about the disease over several generations. Not only young people, but also elder people have seldom seen leprosy patients. Furthermore, there was a serious misunderstanding in the Japanese public that the disease is both contagious and inheritable. The similar belief was found in other countries, but here it was not corrected by leprologists, mass media, nor those in public services. Furthermore, it was not only patients who were stigmatized, the families and even their villages were also stigmatized to be leprosy related and segregated in local communities under the false belief that this was inheritable. That is why patients have to leave their homes silently, discarding their names, birthplaces, and kinship. The families often explain to their neighbors and offspring that he or she was dead. The descriptive analysis summarized here strongly suggests that leprosy control policy in Japan constitutes a significant violation of human rights and human dignity. The case exemplifies that justice in a healthcare policy, especially with regard to inheritable or communicable diseases, should be considered from evidence-based and widely shared information. Also, healthcare professionals, policymakers, lawyers, and also bioethicists are obliged to identify who is the most vulnerable under a healthcare policy and what harm is done to them. This is my conclusion. But I want to add one thing. The last part of my handout. Here is patient's right movement named Tsukuba Reconstruction Appeal. Tsukuba was destroyed by government officials soon after media coverage created a political scandal. Patients with leprosy and supporters are recently demanding the Japanese government to disclose documents with regard to Tsukuba and to reconstruct the building for remembering this place of crime against human rights and dignity. I am calling for your support for the movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Frank, please.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm undecided.
Only 1 minute left.
Because I know it was a very, very bad thing. On the other hand, to perpetuate the memory of sins, which can cause all sorts of bad feelings and things, I don't know. In other words, medical ethics is so strong today, in Japan and everywhere else, that I don't think people are going to return and repeat this sort of thing. So I don't know if it's really necessary to perpetuate memories of such unpleasant things. I simply haven't decided.
Noise.
So Frank is saying,
Outside is so noisy.
pardon?
Outside is so noisy.
Microphone.
Frank was saying that usually Frank is the loudest voice in this room. But Frank was saying that
No.
it may
lesions. And there are some very restricted trials, but also very is
I was a big scan before, and I did applied that the drug is now used in other countries. There was a very big scan.
yeah, so it has been used in Japan as well.
Yes.
Okay.
For mothers, pregnant mothers.
No, for treatment of leprosy. Oh, okay. So it's totally eradicated. There are no patients suffering leprosy in Japan.
No, in Japan, is there anyone who has leprosy now?
In a strict sense, there are few patients suffering from leprosy, but most of them are completely cured.
With the use of Thelema.
Use of
Cured with. Thank you.
Mahala first and then Rachel. Mahala first.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation.
Please, everyone speak very loud.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm working for the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Probably working with leprosy, you are aware of Mr. Yohei Sasakawa's, probably his father's also concerned with leprosy. I wonder what is, I'm not familiar with what is happening in Japan now. I know he is very actively promoting elimination of leprosy in the whole world by 2005. So, can you tell us more about that?
international.
No, about Sasakawa's action on leprosy in Japan and in the world.
As far as I know, I can't answer.
Honestly, you don't.
I don't know.
Just for
Honestly, I don't know. Sorry. Someone else may know.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I remember hearing on the news about the court decision where they found that the Japanese government was at fault for handling. I'm wondering, were reparations paid or will reparations be paid to the patients and their families who were wrong?
Oh, yes. Okay.
In Korea, we have had a very similar system with Japan. Actually, the leprosy control system in Korea started during the colonial period, and we still have a special island reserved for leprosy patients. And I wonder if you have had any communications with, Koreans, promoting this similar cause.
I should apologize to Korea because I didn't mention about the country. The Japanese leprosy introduced or enforced Japanese system to Korea. And yes, I am now communicating with some Korean bioethicists who is interested in this issue.
No, I'm a sociologist, and my friends, my colleague sociologists, did research into the leprosy control system in Korea. So if you are interested, I will pass this.
Yes, thank you very much.
So last question, Margaret.
I have a very similar question. There's still a leper colony in China, in the south of Japanese Shenzhen. I was wondering if you had any contact with them, especially since there's similar practices, like since the introduction of the eugenics law in China in 1995, have taken place out there.
Yes, I appreciate your suggestion. I'm not studying communication with Chinese, but I want to.
I'll give you some.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lucia. So now you're allowed a 5-minute tea break, and please stock up with tea, and we'll return in about 5 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Actually,
And on ethics committees in Japan. Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope we all are refreshed and prepared for the last session. I am myself a little bit tired, but I try to set up myself. And I prepared the full text of paper, which I will read now, and I tried to deliver everywhere. But if there is no your paper on your desk, please raise your hand. Makita will give you. Okay. So let's go. In this paper, first I introduce key findings of a recent nationwide survey of ethics committees in Japan in which I participated. Then I try to interpret them by discussing characteristics of current policy and historical background level in human research in Japan. A research group directed by Yasuko Shirai, so-called the Shirai group we call, of which I am a member, performed a nationwide survey of ethics committees in 2002. And this is an internal record of the survey result, and we are preparing the final report, which will be also published in English. So if you have interest for our survey, please ask me later. In order to keep my presentation 10 minutes, here I would only point out 10 key findings that I think, most important. And I must add that this is my own view, not the representative view of the Shirai group. This is my own personal view of the explanation of the key findings and the key findings themselves. Please see the appendix from the page 5. There is a brief summary of the survey, and raw data is here when you want to know its details. And key findings 1. Small or middle-sized hospitals where human research is seldom performed recognize no urgent need to establish a ethics-review committee. And if you want to see the raw data, please see table 6, the page 7 to 8 of the appendix. 2. Many university medical schools, independent medical schools, medical institutes, or with or without hospitals, and large hospitals in connection with medical schools, have several different review committees in parallel basis. See table 7. 3. Many ethics committees have no female members. 4. Many institutions find it difficult to select and delegate external members of ethics review committees. 5. Few ethics committees include patient representative or journalist as a member. 6. Not a few institutions are reluctant to publicly disclose their committee proceedings. 7. Most institutions do not monitor already approved and ongoing research. 8. Many medical schools struggle with heavy administrative burden and scarcity of administrative staff. 9. Many institutions suffer from absence of principles and standards to review and monitor. 10. Most institutions are not active in educating their own committee members. And then I will go into discussion. Page 2. 1. In Japan, there is no universal requirements of research review committees, such as of IRB by the common law in the United States. Researches with human subjects are regulated by isolated and individual regulations, such as the ministerial ordinance concerning implementation criteria for clinical trials for pharmaceutical products,
the so-called new GCP, the law concerning organ transplantation, the law concerning regulation relating to human cloning techniques and other similar techniques, the guidelines for handling of a specified embryo, and the guidelines for derivation and utilization of human embryonic stem cell, the fundamental principles of research on the human genome, and the ethics guidelines for human genome gene analysis research, the ethics guidelines for epidemiological research, the guidelines for clinical research in gene therapy, and so on. Among them, the new GCP, the guidelines for stem cell research, and for research with embryo, for gene analysis research, for epidemiological research, and for clinical trials of gene therapy, respectively, requires establishment of institutional review committees, but there is no universal provision or standard. Therefore, many university medical schools, independent medical schools, medical institutes with or without hospitals, and large hospitals in connection with medical schools have several different review committees in parallel basis, though not all of them are recognized as ethics committees. And I must add here that now the Ministry of the Health, Labor and Welfare is preparing the guidelines for clinical research in general, and which may be the first general provision. But current draft of the guidelines do not apply to researches that are already covered by existing guidelines. If so, the inconsistency among the provisions remains. In contrast, small or middle-sized hospitals where human research is seldom performed recognize no urgent need to establish ethics review committee and also ethics committee. On the other hand, there is no policy recommendation to establish hospital ethics committee dealing with hard cases in clinical practice. And I would like to add that actually there is little recognition of the difference between the review committee of research and clinical ethics committees, as both are called in the same term ethics committees in Japan. Yeah, and that is another reason why small or some middle-sized hospitals are indifferent to have ethics committees. In fact, hard cases happen more often in larger hospitals than small or middle-sized hospitals. There seems to be at least three problems, I think. First, institutions doing human research routinely have to struggle with heavy administrative burden and scarcity of staff. This causes insufficient protection of research subjects in these institutions, which is resulted, for example, from poor performance of monitoring of already approved and ongoing research. And I marked underlines in these sentences of the key findings. I wrote an underline to the sentences of key findings of these sentences. Okay. Second, when research involves patients in small or middle-sized hospitals, the patient subjects may not be protected sufficiently. Third, when a hard case, such as the refusal of blood transfusion or discussion on letting patient die, happens in a small or middle-sized hospitals, neither doctors nor families can be advised by clinical ethics committee or having a clinical counsel. 2. There is no universal provision for external members in ethics committees, but some guidelines have requirements on external members for their specific review committees. For ethics review committees for gene analysis research, for example, the ethics guidelines for human genome gene analysis research says it is desirable that at least half of members should be external persons. When, however, this is difficult to realize, at least 2 external members must be placed on the committee. It also requires at least half of external members shall be persons expertise in the field of human or social sciences or from the general public, and an ethics committee shall be composed of both male and female members. The guidelines for derivation and utilization of human embryonic stem cell requires ethics review committees to include a person able to give his or her own view as a representative member for the general public, and include 2 or more men and 2 or more women. Similarly, the ethics guidelines for epidemiological research requires ethics review committee to contain a representative person for the general public and both male and female members. The result of our survey reflects these requirements. Most ethics committees have at least a few external members, but they are not well gender balanced, as many of them have no female members. Administrators of ethics committees claim that it is difficult to select and delegate proper person from the outside. But considering their reluctance in education of the committee member and public disclosure, this claim might be discounted. In fact, they hardly invite patient representative or journalist for a member. It is possible that they decline dangerous persons like me, possibly, and select only manageable and safe persons. We should investigate more closely why selection and delegation of external members is difficult for them. 3. Many institutions claim that they suffer absence of principles and standards to review and monitor. It is most serious problem in Japan, I think. Without principles and standards, no one can review or monitor. And probably this is an essential reason why performance of monitoring is poor. Nevertheless, the Japanese government still has not indicated articulate principles on human research. As I pointed in my paper presented here last year, this is one of the adverse effects of cover-up and denial of the medical atrocities performed by Japanese doctors in China in 1930s and early 1940s. Anyway, consistent and systematic policy on ethics committees and effective standards for review and monitoring are urgently needed. And in conclusion, because of lack of consistent and systematic governmental policy on human research institutions suffer from confusion of roles of review committees, burdens of administration, and absence of principles and standards for review and monitoring. As a result, performances of review and monitoring are poor in Japan, I say. For example, once research plan being approved, its actual performance is scarcely monitored. In addition, research institutions are not active in education of their committee members and public disclosure of their committee proceedings. Most small hospitals even don't have any committees. All these may result in insufficient protection of research subjects. Then, Japanese government is urgently required to establish systematic policy and effective standard for research review. This must be done on the basis of serious historical review of past research abuses, which is only way to find firm principle and of research with human subjects. And I must add the final comment on the current Japanese policy. As I said before, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare preparing the general guideline for clinical research, but it is made only by patchworking of provisions of existing guidelines or codes, such as the Declaration of Helsinki. So it is not prepared on the basis of the historical abuse, including, of course, not only including the Unit 731 case, but also the many research abuses performed after the World War II. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Steve and Ali. First, people putting up their hands, they go.
Well, thank you. Very interesting, very informative presentation. I'm curious about your thoughts on the causes or the explanations for the kinds of problems that you identify, which seem to be existed in many kinds of organizations within Japan. And I'm thinking, for example, of explanations, sociological explanations, Doi Takeo's, Tate no Shakai, that in the Japanese social context, authority relations are all vertical, and everyone's tied together in these vertical social links, but there's no horizontal connection across. So people are always looking up or down, but never sideways. Or Carl van Wolferen's very influential book, and The Enigma of Japanese Power, argues that the problem that Japan faces is that the authority, he calls Japan the truncated pyramid, that there's no top, the buck doesn't stop, it just keeps going around. And if that, in fact, if these are accurate descriptions of authority in a Japanese organization, then this kind of solution may be futile. It just may not work, because it may be, this whole idea of an ethics committee structure of governance comes out of really a Western context. So I'm wondering, maybe these explanations are simply not correct, and but I'm curious as to your thoughts about the underlying reasons for these things not taking root the way they, at least people expected them to.
Excuse me, let me show that your question is that my explanation of the plurality or plurality of the committees are not fit into the Japanese thought of the authoritarian, or you want to insist that the review system by the committee itself is not fit into the Japanese culture, which is...
Well, I'm wondering, actually the second is what I'm leaning towards. But really, you've identified a lot of problems, why these aren't working, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts about the explanation. I think Mr. Nudeshima Jiro, in an article explaining the problem with bioethics discourse in Japan, he says there's no problem with bioethics discourse. The problem is political. It's political and organizational. The organizational structures are just not there to permit, and political power is distributed in such a way that it makes it really hard for these kinds of institutions to work effectively. Do you agree with that analysis? Or?
Yeah, I actually agree with him, because that I myself think that the origin or cause of this kind of many guidelines without consistency was the result of the power game of the bureaucrats, I think. So part of these guidelines are enacted by the administrator or bureaucrats in the, for example, the Ministry of Education, and the other one, for example, in was proposed and enacted by the Ministry of Health. So that there is a power game between bureaucrats. So it makes many guidelines, and it is difficult to conclude the whole general guideline, I think. And second point, I'd like to say that I don't know if the ethics review committee system itself is fitting to the Japanese culture or Japanese society. It is the best way. I don't know. I don't know it is the best way. So that's why I'm studying or researching the origin of the ethics review system of the United States. I'm doing a comparative study between the United States and Japan, and why the United States makes such kind of peer review system.
Fascinating. I look forward to following it.
Okay, well, since John is next to you, you can go there and then we'll go close to or one here. Please, everyone, briefly.
My question is very simple, asking for information. I mean, you surveyed only medical schools and hospitals and some medical research institutes. I wonder if Japanese universities have ethics committee to review the research proposals.
That proposal with human subject.
Yeah.
You mean?
Yeah, I mean, for
Yeah.
example, is there a research ethics committee at University of Tsukuba?
Yes, for studies in the medical school. Yes.
No. But research ethics committee only for medical schools, not for biology department.
No, there's one for also for animal experiments. And
So,
one for DNA experiments. But that's all.
So, for example, the ethics review for the behavioral research, there's no committees, or except the nursing school. So nursing school sometimes or often makes a review committee to review their human research in nursing. But the other universities scarcely have behavioral review committee.
Thank you. Next, Tim and Ali, please.
A very simple question, not nearly as profound as Steve's question was. But I'm curious about the people coming in from the outside, these outside members. Are they volunteers, or are they paid something? I imagine hospital staff, that's part of their work, but what about the other people?
Okay, and I mentioned in the summary of this kind of payment. And payment must be explained in page 14, finance for administration of ethics review committee. And usually, ethics administrators of ethics committees pays only for outside, external members of the committee, and the payment is different from these review committees. But on page 14, the column 7, finance for administration of ethics committee, mostly many 60.5% of it pay to 20,000 yen per meeting. So I think that around 10,000 to 20,000 is an average of the payment for external members, I think.
Thank you for your presentation. On page 2, you mentioned that some medical schools have several different review committees in parallel base. Does it mean one university has several ethics committees?
Yes.
How is possible?
You can find, for example, the ethics review committees for the clinical research in pharmaceutical development, and ethical review committees for genetic analysis. research, and it can be the evidence of such kind of DNA, recombinant DNA safety committee, or this parallel.
Okay, later I will ask my second question.
Professor Shoshi.
I am at least member of 4 ethical committee of Tsukuba University Hospital. So there are so many.
My second question is the current situation which you explained, and your examples were based on therapeutic research. I wonder if in non-therapeutic research the situation is the same, and what's the procedure to find the healthy subject from outside the hospital, how they found these subjects, and what's the procedure to give informed consent?
It's the same. I did not mention that only. I did not mention only, not only for the therapeutic research, but also it is a therapeutic, but not an acute. I intended to explain the situation not only for the therapeutic research, but also non-therapeutic research, because it seems that in the hospital, the patient can be either therapeutic, but can be entered into the therapeutic research, but can be the subject of the non-therapeutic research. So, situation covers both sides.
Which is not related to her or his disease? The patient will enter to a research proposal which is not related to his disease, you mean?
Yeah, in a sense. But not only there is no relation to that disease, but I mean non-therapeutic research is that there is no possibility to gain the therapeutic effect by the research, by the purpose, according to the purpose of the research.
Last question was about you.
Actually, I already found the answers on the table, but may I ask another
This
question?
microphone, please. Speak slowly.
Yes, when the ethics committee to review the research project and to decide whether this research is ethical to be done, is there some other factors to affect this decision? I mean, the political factors or economic factors and the personal relationship, something like that.
You mean that other factors affect some kind of have some kind of effects in the research review?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, it might be. I cannot dare to say there is no effect. But as far as they try to be conscious and try to be honest, there, I think that I don't think that it occurs much. Might be, but not so usual.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I missed one question at the back. Makina, please. You had your hand up on the back. Sorry. Stand up.
Yes. I have 2 questions because I'm conducting survey for companies. So I wonder why you didn't include the ethics committee in companies. Yeah, because there are the ethics committee there in the under the guidelines for gene analysis or genome analysis. There are several companies there. And the second question is that, do you think, in conclusion, you mentioned that Japanese government is urgently required to establish policy for standard or research review, and I wonder, just as Steve mentioned, but there's kind of cultural background in Japan about. I think some people really think that the ethics committee is just a procedure in paper. And what do you think about how to change this cultural background or to the people's mind about the ethical, how do you call it, ethical procedure, or how to deal with these issues in the ethics committee in the right way, not as just a paper?
Okay, in second question, I would like to say that this is very simple, and I always say that, for example, I remember in 731. And I mean that as far as the Japanese government tried to implement the ethics review system, there must be a principle, I think. So without principle and implementing ethics review committee is very confusing and inconsistent. That is one reason. And public awareness and as an ethicist, it is unethical to and it is inefficient without to plan a policy without reviewing their past abuse. So it is very interesting to see that how the United States, I don't know exactly what in United States, but United States seem to try to review or forced to review. The United States government seems to force to review, or not government but Congress, or forced to review their research abuse, such as the Tuskegee syphilis studies or human radiation experiment. And they seem to derive these reviews from these reviews some kind of principle, such as Belmont principles. So it is necessary process, I think, in order to make a consistent policy. Excuse me, and to your first question, some institutes and some hospitals are not public, private ones. So our survey contains some private institutions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry we're going to have to cut now. Thank you. So the next paper is by Kazuto Kato on what genomics tells us about nature and humanity, a Japanese perspective. Thank you.
Hello? I see people are getting tired. But in the previous talk, I'd like to say that I'm also a member of at least four ethics committees of various institutions. So I really hope that this program will be solved in some way. But for my talk, we'll have a slight change of the topics. And today I'd like to talk about implications of genome research on our way of thinking about nature and humanity. And in the beginning, I think I have to say that my topics today is still in a quite preliminary stage. So, but I still hope that it will give you some materials for discussion. So can I have the next slide, please? So this is a diagram about history of science in my way, and
what you see here, I'm not going into details, but what you see here is that two separate lines of research. Here on the right and on the left. Well, on the right, which have interest in diversity of life, and on the left, these disciplines wants to have universal rules. These two lines were mostly separated in the past, but now converging into one big field of bioscience. And we also find, from this maturation, we also find a lot of activities on biotechnology, as we all know very well, biomedicine and pharmacology and agriculture and so on. And that brings benefit as well as many LC problems to the society. So, although it is important to find immediate solutions to these LC problems, well, which we are discussing, I think we also need some longer term or maybe more philosophical discussions when we try to know how we can regulate new technology in the coming society. And I believe for those longer term discussions, we do need to see what's going on here. And knowledge from genomics as well as other fields of biology and bioscience will be very useful to those longer term discussions. And I will show you a very few examples. Next slide, please. What you see here about our close relatives, great apes, and us, humans. And thanks to many research works on DNA of these species, we now know that our closest relatives are chimpanzees, and gorilla comes second, and orangutans being a little farther away, shown in the next slide. Well, I guess you all know this diagram. And so human here, and chimpanzees, and gorillas, and orangutan. And what is interesting is that these three are in the close groups, and this one is a little different. Although ordinary people think these three are in the same group. You see? But this I guess. And what I'd like to show you today is further analysis of DNAs of these 4 species. And next slide, please. And that's about diversity within each species. And what you see here is analysis, result of the analysis of DNA of, I think it's mitochondrial DNA. And what this shows is that diversities within these species, these 3, are very large, shown in these branches. But diversity within human population is very, very small. And this means that we humans, while looking around in this room, are very close to each other, and in terms of at least in terms of our genes, genome and genes. Although we recognize the difference between us much more easily than the difference among those within those populations of 3 species.
And also this result is consistent with the hypothesis, well, strong hypothesis, that all of the 6 billion people on Earth now, today, are descendants of only a few tens of thousands, 数万人の people who lived in Africa 150 to 200,000 years ago. 15万年から20万年前. Okay? So we are really close relatives. Okay, next slide, please. A second example is about the difference between bacteria and us. And this is an evolutionary tree of life on Earth. And this is the origin of life. And we have many diverse organisms. And humans are here. And bacteria are here. Well, there isn't any reason, particular reason why human is on the top. I mean, you can put them upside down in any way. I mean, mathematically it's okay. But in any case, as we know more about human genome, we know that human genome has a lot of junk DNA, and only tiny fraction is important. But bacterial genome is very efficient and very compact. So what this says is that bacteria has more efficient genome system for propagation and energy saving than animals and plants. And in a way, they have higher molecular system. They have higher molecular system than we do. Okay, next slide, please. Well, I think I don't have time to show you more examples, and we may need more, but I just cut. So I can show you a summary of some of the things we can learn from the knowledge produced by genomics. And first, well, humans are not a special species. And second, all of the organisms living on Earth, all the species and all the individuals have a unique history as a result of 4 billion years of evolution. And third, humans are not necessarily higher organisms than other species, at least from the point of view of genome research and many biological research. And fourth, all of the organisms share many things, including genes and proteins, as evolutionary descendants of the same ancestor. So in other words, knowledge of genomics leads to an attitude to view living things as historical existence. I emphasize this. And that means they are not simple machines, or they are not just simple industrial products. Though machines and industrial products may be able to be replaced, right, when they are broken. And maybe you may be able to repair them when they are malfunctioning. But the result of genomics tells you that we are not machines and we are historical existence. And also we can recognize closeness of various organisms. We've heard about a comment from Steve this morning, particularly at the molecular and cellular level, even though they look very different on the surface. Next slide, please. If we appreciate these facts, we may be able to have different ways of looking at problems arising from bioscience and biotechnology. And first, well, this is I know this is naive. First, we humans may feel closer to each other, and maybe we can reduce discrimination. I know this is naive, but and second, also at the same time, we may be able to recognize, we may be able to value inherent diversity within the human population. And because we know that each individual has its own history, long history. And third, we may be able to avoid excessive use of technology because we value uniqueness of individuals, individual species, and individual people, individual animals, individual plants, individual organisms. And also importance of natural state. Well, this may be a little bit subjective, but and fourth, we may be able to have stronger reasons to prevent man-made extension of species and preserve diversity of life forms. I know all of these are quite naive, and also I like to say that this needs more elaboration. But next slide, please. But so I know that I need more elaboration, but I just like to say that this kind of way of thinking I presented so far can be found quite often in the discussions by Japanese scientists and Japanese researchers. Obviously, outside people, non-Japanese people, are not very much familiar with those Japanese intellectual discussions because many of the books and articles are written in Japanese. But I can guarantee, and as one example, maybe slightly from a different point of view, I'll show you this event, which was held in last November last year, and this was organized by Genome Sphere. It's called Genome Sphere, and this was organized by a genome research group in Japan. Well, it's a very large one under Millennium Project, to which I belong, and about 100 laboratories here, shown here. About 100 research laboratories had posters, like on the photo there, you see? Posters from one laboratory, and 100 laboratories displayed posters to explain their research. And also they showed wild types and mutants of more than 20 species using genome research. So one of the purposes was to show that we are studying many organisms, and we wanted to show that genome research is not only about human gene, but also about C. elegans, Drosophila, and zebrafish, and the duckfish, the cedians, and morning glory. Unfortunately, we don't see the flowers, but this is morning glory mutant, traditional Japanese collection, and slime mold, which actually Mr. Ushihara here this morning is studying, and other organisms. And we were very happy that this event was very successful. With six days, 5,000 people came, 2,400 in Tokyo, and so on. 5,000. And the number of the researchers were 400, over 400. Well, that includes professors and graduate students and postdocs. But overall, many people interacted. And we also had some panel discussions about bioethics as well. together with this science communication event. Okay, I'm finishing. Yeah, next slide, please. So, I'm not sure I can convince you or not, but I really wonder if we have this kind of way of thinking, because we have a traditional way of appreciating diversity and harmony of nature around us in the Japanese culture. So here are some examples. And it's, they are paintings by Jakuchu Ito in the Edo period, who lived in Kyoto and well known for his excellent ability to draw various animals and plants. You see, particularly on the left, please have a look. He drew more than 60 species of animals. 60. Can you count? No. You really need expert knowledge of biology to know what is what. Well, these animals are in the pond or around the pond. Yeah, you see butterfly, dragonfly, frogs, and newt, and
Animal?
I don't remember, a snake, whatever. And so I'm not saying that, of course I'm not saying that appreciating diversity and harmony of various life forms is unique to Japanese culture. I'm sure that similar ways of thinking is found in other cultures. But what I like to say is that what genomics or modern bioscience is telling us about life, including humans and organisms, have some common features with the traditional way of looking at nature in Japan and of course probably in some other traditional cultures. And I really wonder if this way of thinking may help people to formulate some conceptual ways of regulating technology in the modern society. And I do realize that my argument today needs to be elaborated more, but I really hope that we can have further discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Chamu, please. The microphone is at the back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for the paintings. My question relates to one of the first slides where you talked about an integration of different sciences. And you mentioned, So I was wondering if the role of scientists from the different disciplines and whether there is a sort of domination by a particular group of them from a particular discipline when it comes to the work on biotechnology, medicine, pharmacology, and if there is anything like that, how that would contribute to LC problems or the angle that we take on LC. Is that any problem at all? Am I clear?
So I understand.
My question is, because you've mentioned all these different disciplines, the scientists or the people working from different disciplines, is there a particular domination from any particular discipline in the final integration, that is the biotechnology, pharmacology, agriculture bit? And if there is anything like that, how does that reflect on a consideration of the LC issues?
You mean whether there is any domination by a particular group of scientists?
From a particular
this stage?
discipline perhaps, yes, when it comes to the final integrated stage?
Well, one could say that there is a domination by molecular people over diversity people.
Yeah, how does that affect
And
our consideration
yeah,
of the
yeah.
LC issues?
I would say that because of that, I think domination by molecular people, also domination by medical people as well, I think. So that is reflected to the fact that we are really discussing more about medical ethics and molecular ethics, molecular cellular ethics, than say ecological ethics or environmental ethics, which I think is not very good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks to Dr. Kato, very interesting presentation. Would you like to share some opinions whether human beings are special and whether the human's genetic information is special? Thank you.
Well, I said it's naive, my comment. And, I think human is not special in terms of molecular, physical, biological existence, but probably as a result of extensive use of technology and large amount of cultural heritage, we are special. And that is causing LC, this problem. And that is another aspect. So, I shouldn't say two simple things, but I present it in a simple way.
Thank you. Eva is next.
Okay, mine is a comment and a question all in one. When you mentioned in your, firstly, thank you for wonderful presentation, really. So you mentioned that practically we all became from, let's say, 10,000 ancestors in Africa. Is that the right word, ancestors? Yeah. And I'm wondering if you heard about a certain theory about 7 Eves. Let's say 7 mothers, 7 women, from whom we all became. Because, it's not my field and I don't know much about it. Maybe also Margaret, as an anthropologist, could know something about it if she heard it. But I read somewhere that analyzing human genome, certain researchers came to a conclusion that we all, so today's population of Earth, can be divided analyzing the possible ancestors of ours in 7 groups, and that these 7 groups became from 7 women who are practically the ancestors of the entire population of the world. If you know anything about it, just pop my mind.
Actually, I've just started to read a book.
Oh, great.
But I think it's about particular part of the genome, perhaps mitochondria. So we are a mixture of different parts of genes from different ancestors. That's my understanding, but I may be wrong. Yeah. But if you look at one particular part of the genome, obviously you can identify, often you can identify this is coming from a particular individual who lived in Africa, and several tens of thousands of years ago.
I just want to make a comment about humans.
Can't hear you.
I'd like to make a comment about humans being special. I think we've had a slightly different evolutionary history because of the fact that we have a cultural evolution as well as a biological evolution. Genetically, we are, 98% the same as the chimps. But in our evolution, it seems to be that we have evolved in group. There was a group selection which reinforced the evolution of development of language with the change in the larynx, communication and culture. So I would say that we are a pretty special animal, and therefore we have the obligation to look after the rest because we advance in a certain way.
Well, I think if there is any value of my way of looking at human, is that many of the particularly Western thinking is dominated by human-centered way of thinking, and just to stir up the thinking.
Oh, I can't agree with you more. We will have to be
But
ecocentric.
I really believe that we need to know what is not special and what is special by looking at both biological things and cultural things on the same ground.
Yes, but I feel because we are special, we've got a responsibility. Because our specialness is to remain inquisitive, and it's natural for us to interfere. So we have to.
Well, I don't like the word responsible, or I don't like the way of saying let's save Earth. I don't like it because I think it's arrogant. We are sort of naughty boy or girls running around on Earth. So we don't have any authority. We have to think about what we did.
I thought so arrogant to.
Sorry, yeah, I agree with you in principle,
what we
of course.
spoil, we should try and actually put if we can.
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop the discussion. Thank you.
Can I ask about... Please, Frank.
Frank is not first in line. There's several people also waiting. So.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'll talk to him later.
It doesn't seem to be that great a question anyway.
Thank you. We must move on. I'm sorry. Thank you. It will make Frank stay for the reception. And Margaret had a question, can make a question as the first part of her talk. Thank you. The next speaker is Margaret Sligo from the Netherlands, and she's changed the title of her talk from genetics to a history of my plants. Thank you.
I'm sorry to have been so whimsical, changing my title at the last moment. I'm afraid I've only written the paper at the last moment when I started to properly read the proposal for an integrated mental mapping project, and it made such an impression on me that just the day before I left, I spent the entire day and night rewriting my talk. I assume that you've all read it, the proposal, but I will refer to it during my talk. And well, to begin with, I'd like to ask, to thank Kato-san for his emphasis on history, because I don't feel too lonely then starting to speak about history and mind mapping. While I'll be talking about mind mapping, I will refer to the proposal for an integrated mental mapping project. Not as such, but I'll just take the initials, which is PIMP. I'm calling it PIMP. The aim of making a human idea map, according to the proposal for an integrated mental mapping project, is to answer the question of the universality of ideas. This in turn would help us, according to the PIMP, quote, when we are faced with dilemmas like should we have common guidelines to regulate the use of new biotechnology or assisted reproductive technology using cloning, unquote, on page 6. But, well, I'm not sure, but I think it's rather naive, actually, to believe that ethical views could be taken as decision-making only. The decisions we make in life are often unconscious. Major things that happen in history, I think, have been the result of unintended consequences